一つのたった一人たった一人の私はここ
Hello everybody, I am PhenomSage, and welcome back to another Ancient Magus' Bride episode review. Today we are going to be talking about episode 5, Love Conquers All. And I love that title, no pun intended, because not only does it refer to the flashback that we get in this episode, we get the full extent of what happened between Mina and Matthew, but it also subtly connects to the beginning scene with Chise and Elias, which we will be talking about, but I'm going to save that for the end of the episode just because I want to get into this flashback, so we're going to save that for the end. Right now, let's just get into this flashback. One thing I loved watching this flashback is how stand-alone it felt. Chise did play a part in it, a very minor part I'd like to say. Most of it was just not even in her POV, even though they went through the trouble of showing her that she was inside of it. But for the most part, this flashback took place entirely outside of Chise's point of view, and we just saw it from Matthew's point of view and sometimes from Mina's point of view. And I like that because it shows that this writer and this team are confident that they can tell stories without needing to bind the main cast down to it. You'd actually be surprised by how many authors and creative teams are afraid to take their main characters away from a story and just let side characters do everything for them. But they basically did that in this episode, and what I want is I want so many more of these types of stories, just stories that have nothing to do with Chise or Elias, just standalone stories that can be told that way. I think that's where episodic stories really shine, so I'm hoping that they continue doing this type of storytelling. But in order to convey this flashback in a way that makes sense in the plot, we don't just cut to the flashback, we actually see Chise entering this corruption that we saw last episode, and basically entering the flashback as a spiritual being, almost Harry Potter style. So I suppose if you were going to include Chise, at least that's a more interesting way of doing it, as opposed to just like, I will give you a vision, ooh! So that worked for me regardless, but luckily she wasn't even a part of the flashback for very much, and the parts that she was are actually pretty interesting, and I'll talk about that later. But during this flashback, we actually see what resulted in Matthew becoming the way he was, what caused him to go crazy and start killing cats, because it was pretty heavily implied. That is not a spoiler for this episode, because it was heavily implied last episode that he was the one that went crazy. And we find out that Matthew was actually deceived in a tavern trying to find help for Mina, who is always sick, and he just wants her to get better and be able to live her life to the fullest. In this tavern, Matthew seeks help from this sorcerer just sitting at this lone table in the corner. Clearly a very suspicious guy, but Matthew is just so desperate that he doesn't care. And essentially by the end of all of this, the sorcerer says, you can save her, you can cure her well-being, but you'll need to take the 9 lives of cats in order to make a medicine to do that. So that basically answers where Matthew went crazy and why he's doing the things that he's doing. A few commenters actually had the same theory that Matthew was using the 9 lives of the cats in order to cure Mina. So a good call there, assuming you didn't read the manga, but now we know that it was more of an outside thing that caused all this, more than Matthew just straight up saying, oh wait, cats have 9 lives I heard, time to kill them. Like, at least there was an outside source egging him on, so to speak. Now, what's most interesting about this sorcerer is that nothing really happens to him in the end. Even after all the events with Mina and Matthew, he just leaves. He doesn't give a shit. Clearly a very unlikable person, and he never gets his comeuppance. So he is out there in the world, I assume, right now, in the present time, with Chise and Elias. I have no idea how far back this Mina and Matthew thing really goes. Assuming cats had to live 9 lives and then give their souls to the corruption to put it off, and multiple kings had to do this, I would assume it's a pretty long time ago, but we don't really get any concrete numbers. So I don't know if the sorcerer could live that long, but for some reason, him just leaving makes me think that he is still out there in the world right now, and that we might potentially see him in the future, which I would really like, just so we can get that revenge, please. I was very satisfied with the way that this episode conveyed this more darker and horrific tone and atmosphere than what we've gotten in the series so far. We have not gotten anything like this in the previous episodes. And it is a hard thing to do, to be able to switch tones and atmospheres contrary to what you've been doing and make it work, but they did make it work in this episode. It felt like you were watching a horror series almost. They really built the tension well, the OST was fantastic, and the voice acting, especially on Matthew, was just very, very good and conveyed this very creepy and psychotic tone. But on the other hand, I feel like having Matthew go full psycho by the end was a little bit cliche, specifically because there's not really a reason for it. Killing cats is terrible, but I don't think you just straight up turn into a psychopath, harming the person that you're trying to save, and letting this sorcerer just paralyze her. I think it would have been a more interesting character turn if Matthew was still Matthew inside, and he still had these morals, and he hated what he was doing. He hated killing these cats, but he was doing it to save Mina, and you could maybe even add some scenes of him crying while killing the cats because he doesn't want to, but he knows he has to save Mina. I think that would have been a way cooler turn for his character than just straight up saying, oh, he's crazy now, whatever. By the end of all this, the sorcerer shows up again, somehow paralyzes Mina where she stands. I don't know how a sorcerer can do that. I would imagine only a mage could do that, since sorcerers only use devices, they don't have actual magic. So I don't know how this sorcerer paralyzed Mina, but she's paralyzed. Matthew gives her the medicine made out of all the cats' lives or their blood. Side note, but I am pretty interested in seeing how these lives work. Did Matthew just kill one and then it came back to life and then he killed it again? I don't know how the multiple lives things work. We're kind of just told that they have 9 lives and then that's it, but I think it'd be interesting to see how it actually functions. Either way, Mina takes the medicine and is writhing in pain, but Matthew isn't phased. He's saying, the sorcerer said it would hurt at first, but don't worry, you'll be okay after a little bit. And then she freaking explodes. She freaking explodes. The end. What a happy story. They do a good job of making you sympathize with these two characters because really, they were deceived, as Chise says. It wasn't their fault. Matthew was deceived all along, and Mina just happened to be a victim in this situation. Looking back, I don't really see why she says it's her fault other than the fact that she's bedridden. Like, that's not your fault. I wouldn't really take responsibility for that, but whatever. So Mina explodes and basically turns into the goop, the corruption that we see in the present time. And I guess that's why we see her spirit inside of the corruption. I'm not really sure what the mechanics are around all this, but we'll go with it. And at this point, Matthew's basically lost it. He thinks that it didn't work because he didn't use enough cats, so he goes outside, sees Mina's cat, Tim, and says, oh, there's another one. I'm glad you're here, Tim. It's time to save Mina. And something I didn't realize, I think that they said that the first king of Cat Kingdom was named Tim. I'm not sure if they did, but they reveal here that Mina's cat was the first king of the Cat Kingdom and the person who led the assault and killing of Matthew, who also happens to have just the most badass voice I've ever heard a cat have. Probably the highlight of the episode, though, is when Mina and Molly are walking away in this void. Assumedly, they're erasing their own existence or something. I don't know. That part was confusing to me. I don't know what it is they were doing when they needed Chise to erase their existence, but Chise finds another way. She thinks of something, and this is a great moment for Chise because she doesn't just sit and watch something happen, she actually makes something happen, something better than what the initial outcome would have been. Instead of erasing their existence, what she does is sends Mina and Matthew to the afterlife so that they can live happily there, or at least I assume that's what the afterlife is just them in this flower field. Why she needed Ariel for that, I don't know. Hopefully you guys can explain some of the finer details here because I'm not understanding all of it, but I get the basic picture. And during this scene, we just get a wonderful vocal track, a wonderful OST. The OST in this series has been great so far, and it's nice to hear that continue in this episode for one of the more beautiful moments of the series. Still not beating Nevin, but it's still good. It's still good. What I liked about this scene, though, and some of Chise's involvement in the flashback where we see her point of view, is that we see that Chise is more connected to this backstory and these characters than she has for anything the entire series so far. And I don't think it's just because of this story. I don't think it's just because of these characters. I think Chise, just as a character, is starting to care more and starting to connect more. And you can see that subtly through her development in this flashback. You see her reaching for Mina, not wanting her to go inside and seeing the fate of Matthew. You see her crying after she exits the flashback, seeing what became of them both. It was a very sad story, but I think that Chise just is learning to care more. And by the end of this scene, you hear this final dialogue with her, saying that she has never had a place to go, she's never had anyone care about her, but that now she maybe has finally found her perch. And I'm not sure if you could go this far with it, but what I get from this is that not only does she have her perch next to Elias, by Elias's side, but her perch is bringing peace to these people who have been suffering for so long. It could be that now she finally has a purpose, something that she feels like she can do and she enjoys doing for other people, which in that case, that's a huge leap from where she started at the beginning of this series. Speaking of Chise and Chise's development as a character, let's rewind back to the beginning of the episode. Last week, you'll note that I said that this was a completely fake cliffhanger. It's going to be resolved in 2 seconds. I don't really think there's much to it, and I was completely right. This is resolved in 2 seconds, but we do learn some interesting information about what the Slay Bega is, and some occurrences in previous episodes that now make sense. For example, we saw that Chise passed out at the end of that Nevin sequence, and I chalked it up just to the fact that she went through this emotional, very exhausting experience flying with Nevin. I was exhausted after that episode because I was crying like a baby. But it turns out that Chise, using her magical power to let Nevin get his last flight, ended up expending too much of that magical power, and that is what caused her to pass out at the end. Furthermore, we find out that Chise as a Slay Bega is just constantly letting out magical energy and absorbing it at the same time. Now, what this will mean for future occurrences, I don't know, but she is just a magical conduit. She's letting out energy and she's taking it in all the time, which naturally is pretty dangerous. Something that could eventually lead to her death. I don't know if that's something that will lead to her death eventually, but it could. Either way, Chise was giving a false startle to everybody after she hears that. She's just like, I don't care. Even if Elias is lying to me, and even if I am going to die, Elias is the only one that's treated me like family. So I will stick by his side to the end until he leaves me. And this is easily my favorite part of the episode, even above the flashback, just because it shows this dynamic is so damn good. I love these two characters, and I love the way the relationship is developing over time. The curious thing about it, though, is that we never really got an answer from Elias about his role in all of this. He doesn't say like, oh, I knew it would kill you, but I took precautions, or it's not going to kill you, don't worry, I would never let that happen. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't say anything about how Chise's role as a Slay Bega would eventually kill her, which is very odd. Hopefully we get an answer on that next episode, because the flashback kind of took up the entirety of this episode, so we didn't really get a chance to hear Elias saying much. One thing I liked, though, in this beginning scene is Renfred's involvement and his subtle characterization. As he explains that Chise is bound to die by following Elias, he wants to release her from this tracking device around her neck, the thing that Elias gave her in episode 1. And when Chise denies him and says, you wouldn't understand, I belong to Elias, he's not mad about it. He's not angry, and he's not spiteful. He's legitimately confused. He's like, you really don't want to be set free knowing that you will die? Why? And then later on, when Elias protects Chise and unleashes his thorns on Renfred and Alice, when Alice gets cut, Renfred is genuinely concerned about Alice. He's like, Alice! So what I like about this characterization is it shows that Renfred isn't just a normal evil villain. He's not evil for the sake of being evil. In fact, he seems like he could be an alright guy on his own. He cares about Alice, and he wants Chise to be free from Elias. So I think the only problem here, the only hostility, is between Renfred and Elias. There's not really anything else going on. It's not like Renfred is a bad dude. It's very strange, but I like the way that they added these bits in to make you not really hate Renfred as a character. I can only hope that he has a recurring appearance in this series and sometimes might even play more than just a opposing force. Like maybe he'll team up with Elias and Chise eventually for a mission that they need to. But that's been all from me for this episode review of Ancient Magus' Bride. Thank you guys for watching. One other thing that I just wanted to mention, I feel like I should make a note of this, seeing as though it's a review. There were a few comedy bits in this episode where they go switch to the chibi style that I've talked about before. And just like in the previous episodes, it just does not work here. And I kind of wish they'd just stop it. Please don't do that anymore. It barely worked in Full Metal Alchemist, and it barely works here. You'll be in this tense, very atmospheric situation. There was one with the sorcerer and Matthew talking in the tavern. You have this very intense music playing, very mysterious, and then it just cuts out, switch to chibi, and oh, it's comedy. Sorcerer is making fun of Matthew, and it just doesn't work for me. I'm not a big fan of that. So I figured I'd mention it just because that's been one of my main complaints about the series so far, is that I feel like the comedy integration isn't the best that it could be. But overall, it was a really good episode. Those moments are few and far between. Thank you again for watching. Stay tuned this Wednesday for my Made in Abyss Chapter 30 review. That's going to be awesome. Hope you guys are doing well. And as always, have a great day.
たった一人の